Good evening. Pleasure to be here and to talk once again to Chitra. We did this when your last novel came out, One Beautiful Thing.
One Amazing
One Amazing Thing.
Yes.
It was a long time ago.
It was.
It was before the Asia Society moved into this space.
That's right, into this beautiful location. It's so wonderful to be here.
Let's talk about Oleander Girl to begin with. And where did this book come from?
You know, this book, more than any of the others, is a mystery. As you might remember, with One Amazing Thing, there was an actual event in my life that gave me the idea for the book, which is an event that many of you participated in, which is our evacuation from Houston when Hurricane Rita was coming right at us. I mean, that's when I was stuck on the freeway at 2 a.m. at night with all of these strangers, all of us going crazy, and I said, I have to write a book about this kind of situation. But with this one, I think it was a quieter kind of genesis. It's a book that I've been thinking about for a long time. I've been thinking about it every time I went back to India the last few times, because this is a book about the clash of the old and the new in India. And it's a book about how fast India is changing, and yet how traditions remain important. It's also a book about family secrets. It's a book about the hero's journey, because the main character will come to America on a search. So it's a book about all these things that have been important to me and that I've been thinking about. And in some ways, it's a book about the post-9/11 world and how 9/11 has really changed things for many, many of us, not just in America, not just immediately, but you know, the ripples of that have been felt all over. So I've been thinking about all these things.
Set in 2002, at the center of the story is Korobi. Tell us a little bit about her. She's this fascinating character that is at the center of the book and at the center of the mystery.
Thank you. Korobi is the protagonist. She's about 19 years old. She's been brought up in Kolkata, the city where I was born and spent many years. She's been brought up in this old traditional mansion by her grandparents because her parents are dead. That's what she's been told. Her mother died in childbirth. Her father died in a car accident even before. And she's brought up with the old traditions. And yet, she's very aware of the allure of the new. She falls in love with a young man who's from one of the nouveau riche families, and they get engaged. And then something happens where she has to put off the engagement, and she has to go to America on a search because she finds out that her grandfather has kept a secret from her all his life. And it is in search of the secret that she'll go to America.
She comes to America. She's here for 3 weeks. And she goes back. How does the experience of coming to America change her?
Well, it's an interesting kind of transformation. It definitely changes her because it's her first adventure, as it were. It's the first time she's left the family, that she's stepped into a new world by herself. And so, as with the myth of the hero's journey, she faces danger, she faces friends and enemies, and she has to make a decision at the end which will change her whole notion of herself and of what love is. Because on one level, this is a story about the old and the new and the global world and the effects of religious violence. But on another level, it's a family story, and it's a love story, and it's a story about who we're allowed to love and who we end up loving.
There is this generational play throughout the book. Korobi, what's her relationship to the past, to those who have come before? For her, obviously, her grandparents have raised her. So she's sort of, in some respects, skipped a generation. What is her relationship to that past that they represent?
I think her relationship to that past is kind of like my own, which is complicated. I love the past, and so does Korobi, but she doesn't love all of it. She loves some things about it. She loves her grandparents, and she loves the old house in which, she goes to boarding school, but she comes home every year to that house, and she loves that house. But she's also, sometimes she feels a little restricted. Sometimes she feels that her grandfather especially wants her to be a person that she isn't, wants her to represent the family, whereas she has an individual self and individual desires, which are not always in sync. For instance, she's just as the novel starts, she's about to get engaged to Rajat, the young man that she falls in love with. And the families are okay with that, but she decides to get an outfit for the evening engagement party, which is in this very posh hotel. Well, when her grandfather sees this outfit, which is kind of a fusion kurti outfit, a kind of off-the-shoulder thing, he's just horrified, and they have this huge fight. So those are the kinds of things. Now, you said that she skips a generation, but she has a strange, or maybe not so strange, fascination about her parents, with her parents.
And in some respects, she does have a relationship with her mother, because she has dreams about her mother in which she feels that her mother is speaking to her.
Or that her mother is trying to convey something to her. Yes,
and that's how the book opens, isn't it?
Yes, and I thought maybe I'll read that passage at a certain point.
Well, why don't you read it now?
This is a good time.
Talking about it.
So this is from the very beginning of the book. This section is in Korobi's voice. It's in first person. Not all the novel is in first person. It's from the point of view of various people that you might expect, like her fiancé Rajat, and people that might surprise you, like Rajat's chauffeur, Asif. But this one is in Korobi's voice. And it's the night before the engagement. In the morning will be the religious engagement ceremony in their home. In the evening will be this posh party for which she's bought this outfit and hidden in the back of her closet. I'm swimming through a long underwater cavern flecked with blue light. The cavern of love, with Rajat close behind me. We're in a race, and so far I'm winning because this is my dream. Sometimes when I'm dreaming, I don't know it, but tonight I do. I smile and feel my mouth filling with cool silver bubbles. Rajat's fingers brush the backs of my knees. Even in my dream, I know that if I slow down just a bit, he'll grab my waist and pull me to him for a mischievous kiss. Imagining that kiss sends a shudder of pleasure through me. But I don't want it yet. The chase is too much fun. I surge away with a splashy kick. Hey, he calls in spluttering protest, and I grin wider. Competitive, he slices through the water with his fierce butterfly stroke and lunges for my ankle. I wait for his strong electric grip to send a current through my veins. My mouth floods with anticipation of our kiss. Then, out of nowhere, a wave breaks over me. Salt and sand are on my tongue. I try to spit them out, but they fill my mouth, choking me. Where's Rajat when I need his help? Gasping, I thrash about and wake in my bed, tangled in my bed sheets. And this is the bed that used to be her mother's bed when she was a girl. As my eyes adjust to the darkness, I know at once that someone is in the room. My heart flails around, It's impossible. I always lock the door before going to sleep, and the window is barred. But there it is, in the armchair in the corner of the night room, a still female form, black against the darkness of the room, looking toward me. Mother, I whisper, my fear replaced by yearning that's as old and as illogical as anything I can remember. I know so little about my mother, only that she died 18 years ago, giving birth to me. A few months after my father, an ambitious law student, had passed away in a car accident. Perhaps she died of a broken heart. I never knew for sure because no one would speak to me of them. My grandparents had to put aside their own broken hearts to care for me, and I'm grateful. They did it well. Still, all through my years growing up, I longed for a visitation from my mother. Now, years after I had armored my heart and accepted that she was gone from my life, here she is. How can I be sure it is her? There are some things we know in our breath, in our bones. So Corby's wondering, why is her mother here? And she figures it's because her mother needs to know that she's okay before she takes on a new life. She gets engaged. She's on her way to adulthood, to becoming married. So she tries to talk to her mother. She tells her mother about her sweetheart, how wonderful he is, and how she's sure he will take good care of her. But something's not right. Her mother doesn't seem happy. And I'll read from that part. Still the air in the room hangs uncertain, incomplete. My mother continues to look out the window. Why will she not speak to me? Where is the blessing kiss I've wanted all my life, cool as a dew-drenched breeze on my forehead? And then she understands. She hasn't come to learn about me. All the things I said to her, she probably knew them already, being dead. She has appeared now instead to tell me something. But what? Talk to me, Mother. This time when she turns to me, I notice that my dream mother has no mouth. Her frame shivers with effort as though she longs to speak. She begins to dissolve. I can glimpse the ocean through her tattered body, waves breaking apart on rocks. An urgent sorrow radiates from her disappearing form. Then she's gone, and I'm finally awake, blinking in the first rays of the sun, entering the room through the bars. And so that's how she begins her engagement day. And now she's really intrigued and concerned, and she decides that she has to ask her grandmother what this means. But when she does ask her grandmother's response is really going to surprise her.
What is so interesting about Korobi and her journey in this book is to what extent it mirrors the journey that her mother took. Because her mother left for America. She got a scholarship to go and study at UC Berkeley.
My old school.
Right. And that's, without giving too much away, Korobi takes that journey.
Her search will take her
Right.
over there at some point.
She comes back. Korobi comes back.
But we won't tell them what happens
Right.
after she comes back.
One of the questions that she has, obviously, she has questions about, her parents and
Yes, she's absolutely fascinated by these shadowy figures. She spends a lot of time thinking about them. And she feels that unless she knows her parents, she's not going to know herself.
And one of the questions that she has is why her mother named her Korobi. Korobi is Bengali word for oleander.
That's right, that's right. So yes, that is something she asks her grandmother many times. Why would my mother name me after a flower that's beautiful, but that's also poisonous? And it's a question that it'll take her the entire book before she understands.
Whetting our appetites. Let's talk a little bit about Rajat. Because in some respects, they are an unlikely couple, aren't they?
They are. He comes from, although he's coming from the same city, he's from a very different background. His background, as I said, it's a nouveau riche background. His parents own this art gallery in this very swanky part of town. And Rajat is quite, at least until he meets Kauravi, he's quite the young playboy, goes to all the discos, he's very familiar with nightlife, he hangs around with, similarly disreputable young people. But when he meets Kauravi, it's like he undergoes a transformation. He is completely fascinated by her life. And as he tells her, he feels that she's appeared from out of a fairy tale, that old mansion, it's like stepping back in time, and that her grandfather is the ogre that guards her in that castle.
There is an irony that Rajat is from this, as you said, that nouveau riche family, very modern, contemporary, and yet what he is drawn to is the sort of the traditionalism of Kauravi and her grandparents, that whole family, the Roys.
Right. I guess, in some ways it's a case of differences attracting, but as often happens when differences attract, there are so many differences that at a certain point they're going to start thinking very, their way of thinking is not going to mesh, and they're going to have a lot of conflict. They're going to have to come to terms with that as well, because yes, the way of thinking, it is a whole different thing, and that's what fascinates me about India. And I'm sure it's there in every culture, but in India, I think because a part of India is changing so fast, we really see that. We see the modes of thinking shifting very quickly.
And there is that clash, isn't there, between sort of the traditional and the modern that is manifest in many different ways in the book.
Yes.
And there is there is the backdrop of the religious violence in Gujarat.
Right, because the Godhra riots are taking place right when this book, right on the day of the engagement, that's the day the Godhra riots start.
There is that conflict as well, obviously, in post 9/11 New York and America, that mystery of anybody who looks different, who has brown skin, etc. And there is that clash between sort of the world of Rajat's family and the world of Kauravi's family.
Right, and an additional clash, or at least conflict, potential conflict or complications between the world of the rich and the world of the poor, the world of the quote-unquote masters and the world of the servants, because the servants become very important in this book. They play an important part in many ways.
So the way that those relationships, those differences are bridged, if you like, do you see those things occurring in present-day India? Are those attitudes changing?
Well, the book, as with many of my books, is a reflection of real life as I've seen it, but also a hope. I think there are many conflicts. I certainly think it's possible and important for us to resolve those conflicts, for us to coexist with difference in a positive way, to relate to difference in a positive way, both in India and in America. Does it happen all the time? No. Does it happen sometimes? Yes. So I think I've focused on some places where those differences will be bridged in positive ways, and some places where those relationships will fall apart and become much worse.
How has Korobi suffered as a result of her parents not being there? She's been raised in this very loving family. Her grandparents adore her. She adores them. But she has, in some respects, paid a price, hasn't she, for not having her parents there?
Yes, and I guess it's that kind of throwback. It's that generation that's missing, because I'm completely sure that her parents would have raised her differently. Her grandfather raises her in the way, and I say grandfather because he's kind of the ruling force in the house, until suddenly he's going to have a heart attack, he's going to pass away. And then that's another theme in the story. The grandmother, who's always been in the background, will have to take over in some ways, and Korobi will have to help her take over. But she has been brought up with a sense of tradition, of how things are done. This is a very traditional household. They have a temple that's like a century old in their home compound. So you can imagine how traditional this family is. And her grandfather has been very resistant to change. And only after he dies, she's even going to realize how resistant he's actually been. So I think she misses what her parents would have given her, which is a sense of the larger world. Until her grandfather dies, pretty much all Korobi knows about the world is boarding school and this mansion and her grandfather's friends. That's all she's known. And that's why when she falls in love with Rajat through meeting through a college friend, she falls really hard because he's like nothing she's ever known. He is, if he sees her as a fairy tale princess, she sees him as Prince Charming. And as the novel goes on, they will both find out that obviously that cannot be the case.
And that notion of love, that romantic love, is reinforced by sort of the only memento she has of her mother and father, which is this partial letter that she finds by accident stuffed into between the pages of a book of poetry in her grandfather's library.
Right. And she correctly guesses that it's from her mother to her father. And she guesses because it talks about her father being so far away and her mother missing him so much, and that he's in a whole different world. She guesses that their love was one that lasted beyond the father's death. And so she idealizes love. She thinks that's what love must be. And so she's searching for a love like that in her own life. And as we know, when we have these very idealized notions, the reality is always going to be different and troubling. But you're right in that this book is very much also about the nature of love. And I wanted to take a moment to read the epigraph, which is a poem that it's from a poem that I'm really fond of by W.B. Yeats. And it's a poem on the nature of love. And these are the lines in the epigraph. Oh, love is the crooked thing. There is nobody wise enough to find out all that is in it. For he would be thinking of love till the stars had run away and the shadows eaten the moon. Ah, penny, brown penny, one cannot begin it too soon. So I think in a way this novel is about how complicated love is and how baffling and yet how important. One cannot begin it too soon. It is never too soon to love, not just in the romantic sense of love, but in the human sense of love. And I certainly hope that the book will make readers think about it.
That sense of love is borne out in the way she feels about her grandfather. She worships him. She loves him so much, and she's devastated when he dies. Of course, immediately after he dies, she learns about the secret that he has kept from her from all these years. And that sort of, in some respects, tempers her grief. But she doesn't let that change the love that she has for him.
Well, I think that love becomes very complicated then, because she realizes he's kept a secret and she feels it was very wrong of him to keep an important secret like that from her. And so she loves him, and now she's torn because the person she's idealized all this time has done something she feels is really wrong, really hurtful, something that's harmed her. And so, I mean, how do you come to terms with that? That's what she's going to have to struggle with through a large part of the novel before she can decide, before she's able to decide whether she can forgive him or not. And maybe the forgiveness will come because of something really unexpected and unusual that she'll hear.
It's also very interesting and quite funny, I think, the way that her relationship with Rajat is assisted by the families. You know, it's not just the two of them working it out, is it?
No.
It involves.
And I really wanted to show that because that has been my experience and perhaps the experience of some people here, that, you know, within Indian culture, when you get married, you don't just marry the bride or the groom, you marry, in some ways, the entire extended family. And so from both sides, there's a lot of assistance or interference or, you know, concern. When things are going well, there's a certain kind of involvement. When things begin to go badly between them, when Corby goes to the United States and Rajat has to stay back in India, and, you know, he's going to face some major problems. Some of them are personal and some of them are larger and work involved. The Hindu-Muslim violence will break out in their own warehouse, and he's going to have to deal with that. You know, they're going to go through some hard times, and their families are going to be involved with them the entire way.
I don't know, when you set out and started to write this book, you had an idea of what the trajectory of the story was going to be, or no, you didn't? I was going to say, when you got to the final chapter and you write the final, that final period there, was it the book that you had originally thought it was going to be?
No, it wasn't really. And this is often the case with many of my books, and you know, there are some wonderful writers here in the audience, Vaz and Tony from the UH program, and maybe there are other writers back there whom I can't see. And I think writers often realize that the book takes off on its own sometimes. You know, you have a general idea. At least I do. I mean, maybe other writers are different. I have a general idea. I knew that the mythic motif for this book was the hero's journey. I knew Corby would have to leave her sheltered home and go on a search. I didn't know what would happen after that. I really kind of allowed the book to take its course, and I allowed Corby's character to decide what she would do next. So when she's faced with decisions at certain points, I didn't know ahead of time what would happen.
Who changes the most?
In the novel?
Yes, I mean, the easy answer would be to say it's Corby. But
well, I would like to ask you that. Now I'm testing St. John. Has he really read the book?
Well, I mean, everybody changes.
I think so.
And you know, that comes back to the point you make that you're not just marrying one person, you're marrying the whole family.
The whole extended family, including the servants, are involved in this. Right? And right in the beginning, there's, after the marriage, in the house, they're taking a family portrait. And the servants all come there for the family portrait because these are servants who've been with the family for a long time. they definitely feel they're part of the family. They're very invested in this relationship.
And I love your use of cars.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that because I did not know like hardly anything about cars before I wrote this novel. But as I wrote this novel, something interesting happened, which is the chauffeur, Asif, whom I had originally thought of as a minor character, he began to become more and more important. And more parts of the story were told in his voice, and he became important in the action and in the thematic structure of the story. And he just loves cars, and he knows a lot about them. So guess what? I had to do a lot of quick research on the kinds of cars that he would be in touch with and the kinds of cars that he would love. And, you know, his whole understanding of human nature is kind of based around cars, how people handle their cars, how people treat their cars, what kind of cars they drive, etc.
And that's one of the strongest points of contact, really, between the two families, is Asif and the, what's his name?
Rajat's sister?
No, the
other
servant from Nepal.
Right, Bahadur,
Because
who is the chauffeur of the other family,
Right.
who's kind of, and the other family has kind of now fallen on hard times, so he's the chauffeur and the gatekeeper and, you know, the overseer of the gardener and everything. But yes, they develop a very unlikely friendship.
And Asif is driving Rajat and his family around in a new Mercedes.
Right.
And
Bahadur has this old Bentley.
this
that's
old
been,
Bentley,
Yes, been in the
very
family
sort
for
of stately
generations.
and sort of colonial, and
Yeah.
it's quite fascinating. But that's their point of contact, isn't it?
That is. And actually in their relationship too, I think there's kind of like a clash of the old and new, because Bahadur, who's much older, has this older sense of how, servants in a household relate to the people of the household, the quote-unquote masters, because that's how he thinks of them. And Asif, who is very modern in many ways of thinking, really dislikes that. He's like, I'm just as good as the people who employ me. I am not going to let them treat me any different. And that leads to some conflict between them in the beginning before they begin to see things that they have in common. I think Sabrina is trying to tell us something. Sabrina, is it getting to that time?
I think Sabrina's trying to tell us that it's time to wrap up. But before we do want to mention that you don't just have one book that has come out within the last few days. You have the second one.
That's right, and that is very exciting for me and quite unexpected, because these two books have come from different publishers and they just happened to coincide the publishing date. They didn't know it either until they had decided. And so this is Grandma and the Great Gourd, and this is my first children's picture book, and it's based on a folk tale, a Bengali folk tale that my grandfather used to tell me. And if there are Bengalis in the audience, they will recognize this right away, because this is a grandmother who's going to go through the forest, and wild animals will be waiting to eat her up. And you'll have to read the book.
I'm sure, Chitra, you're happy to take questions from people in the audience?
Yes, easy questions.
Any
Praise
questions?
is also acceptable.
Questions? Okay. Go ahead. I'll get to you.
What inspired me to write? How did I start the whole process? That is a good question, because when I was growing up, unlike a lot of people who know fairly early that they want to be writers, I didn't. All the time when I was growing up in India, I had no inclination, no aptitude, no desire. I didn't think I had any stories. I'd always loved teaching, so I knew I wanted to do that. But I think really immigration is what made me into a writer. I was thrust into a very different world. I came from a very traditional Bengali family. And I think I wrote just to make sense of how the world had changed around me. I started writing very tentatively, just for myself. For many years, I was a closet writer. That's how I started.
Other questions here, right here.
Congratulations on one more book. But
Thank you.
I know you're a Bengali, so being a Bengali, everybody is, like inspired by Rabindranath Tagore somewhere down the line, or you've come across Rabindranath Tagore's writing somewhere. And was there any inspiration from Rabindranath Tagore's writing into writing Oleander Girl?
Definitely. I think Tagore has been an influence in my life for a long time. I read him growing up. I love especially his short stories. I teach him quite regularly at the University of Houston. And I think I took the idea of the Oleander Girl from Korubi from Tagore, because he has a play that's of the same name. So yes, he was definitely in my mind. And I think Tagore was also very interested in some of the things that are important to me. What are the relationships between different classes, the quote-unquote masters and the servants? What is the relationship of the woman within the family? What is love? Those are themes that keep coming up in his books. So I think I have a lot to be thankful to Tagore for.
I think there's a question there, Fritz.
I was interested, Chitra, in your comment that you started this novel without really knowing where it was going to go there. And I'm wondering, is that been the case with all of your books? And second, is that a highly inefficient way of writing? When you get to some point, you look back and you realize the 75 pages of the book last month.
Yes, to all those questions. I think with many of my novels, I don't know what's going to happen in the end. I kind of have enough of an idea that I can keep writing. It's like another writer said this, and he said it better. It's like driving in the night in a fog with your headlights on. You don't see the entire road, but you see enough to keep going. And you trust you'll get to your destination. So that's kind of how writing is for me, except for one novel, The Palace of Illusions, which was based on the Mahabharata. So that was a modern retelling of that ancient epic. So that storyline was already laid out for me. In that book, the question was, how am I going to tell this old story in a way that is relevant today? And my take in that story was, it was told in the voice of one of the major women characters, who is certainly there in the original epic and who's important, but whose voice is never heard. She's just there. Things happen to her. And so that was what I did. But I knew where the story was going.
We have a question back here, right here. Up here.
Yes.
Up here.
And just one moment. And yes, when you write like that, you have to go back and change things. But that's not a bad thing, because that means this story has taken on a power, it's got an organic sense of growth, and it's going where it needs to go, which may be a better place than what my conscious mind envisioned for it. Yes?
How many books have you written?
How many books have I written? I've written 18 books now. So, yes, my first books were books of poetry. I also have books of short stories. But I think, I love the novel form. I really love writing the novel. You have a chance, an opportunity, and also it's the challenge because you're trying to create a whole world.
There's a question here, Evan.
Oh, and this is a trick question from the audience. What am I writing that's really different and I love? I am writing a libretto for the Houston Grand Opera, and there are some opera people there in the audience. Wave to me, opera people. Yes, I'm writing a libretto, and actually, Sinjin knows a lot about the series that I'm writing for, which is the East-West series that's been showing here. The opera has done some beautiful shows.
It's part of the, and I'm speaking on behalf of Houston Grand Opera now, it's part of the Song of Houston project, which is a way for the opera company to reflect the community that it is part of. And so they have commissioned what we call chamber opera, smaller pieces that come out of some of the different immigrant communities represented here in Houston. So you're working with Jack Perler, who did an opera called Courtside, which was came out of the Chinese community, and obviously was to do with, in some respects, with basketball.
Right.
That was the court. And does yours have a name yet?
We're working on a name. We have some ideas in mind. So a working title is Where Are the Lamps? And because this is a story about a young woman who gets married, and she comes to Houston, she marries someone who's not Indian, and she has a baby, and it's the baby's first Diwali, and she wants to, she wants to do the right thing. She wants to have a really good Diwali celebration, but she can't find all of the ingredients. And I won't give away anymore. But I'm very excited. It's been a whole different experience writing the libretto and having Jack Perla look at it. And the first thing that Jack said, he said, "I want your lines like this thin. You can't, you prose writers, you go all the way to the end of the page. No more of that."
We have a question here, and then there's one in the front.
You just talked about where are the lamps. I know you've not always lived in Houston, and Houston is now and has for many years been home to you after California. What is it that lights up your life here in the Houston area? What about Houston do you love?
Well, I really do love a lot of things about Houston, and that was one of the reasons I asked my publisher. I said, I want the national launch for this book to be in Houston. Now, generally, they like to do it in New York, but I said, I really want it to be in Houston, not just because I love Houston, but because Houston, I have felt, is a very literary city. There's a lot of support for the arts in Houston, and particularly for literature with our wonderful writing program and in print. I know there are in print people in the audience and writers in the schools. We support a whole literary community, and I just wanted to be a part of that with this book launch. But I think I also love the multicultural nature of Houston, the energy of Houston. I feel that it's a city with a lot of vivacity and a lot of energy, good energy, not only in the arts, but in philanthropy, and in just so many ways, I think. And I like our winter weather.
I think one last question right in the row here. Woman, you just raised your hand right there.
Oh, definitely. The question was, how has having children and bringing them up in this country influenced my life and my writing? Definitely well, the first thing is, children really keep you grounded because, I'll give you an example. The other day, my youngest, who's just gone to college, sent me a scan of a page from his textbook. He said, "Mom, there's a poem by you in this textbook. P.S. Don't be getting a big head now." So I think the children are very useful in keeping one grounded. But I think also they've influenced my writing because I think I started writing for children because of my children, and not just for them, but because I was aware that there's a real need to present multicultural literature uh, to children, not just children of our Indian American community, but children of all kinds. It's healthy for them to see and to relate to characters who are different from them, who come from a different place, just as it's important for Indian American children to have heroes and heroines that they can relate to culturally. So I think a lot of my writing for children has come out of my thinking about what I would like my children to read.
So we have the real last question, is right here.
The very last question.
Most of your books have central character, a female as a central character. Why is that? And do you have plans to have a man as a central character?
That's a good question. I guess it's a good last question, too. Yes, just about all of my books have women at the very center, although I would think that, the men are important, too. For example, Rajat is very important in this book. Asif is very important. The grandfather is very important. So, I explore the relationships between men and women. But I guess it's just my interest. It's just what I know really well, what I feel really strongly about. I think a lot about women and their place in the world, both in the world in India and the world here, and the world of imagined places, which sometimes I write about. So I think women see the world differently, and I like exploring that in my books. So I think that's why. And would I ever have a man as the central character? Maybe. Maybe I will find a hero like my husband who's sitting in the...
Before I came here, I thought what I had in common with Delhi here was the weather and the warm people. I didn't realize the traffic too. I apologize for being late. But before I get to Oleander Girl, this is rodeo season. I was at the rodeo 3 days or 4 days ago, and that was before I read the book. And I took my daughter, and as we toured the various breeds of cows, there was a strange yet a familiar name. It was called Brahman. It sounded unique, apparently. So we went closer, inspected the breed, and it said this was a species which came from the Indian subcontinent many, many years ago into Texas. And then there was a small comment about its unique nature. It can adapt to adversity. It can thrive in a drought. And it can live in very hardy circumstances. I internalized that and came home, and I said, in preparation for today's function, I said I must read the book. And I read the book. And then it struck me that in addition to Brahman being a common link between India and Texas, there was also oleander, of course, a flower that is native to India, but also that is closely associated with Texas, Galveston. And again, what makes this a very unique flower is that it thrives in adversity. Routinely in India, oleander is used as a road divider. It can take all the pollution, it can take all the dust and grime, and many, many days of not watering it. Yet it thrives. I think in a larger sense, I won't talk about the book, but in a larger sense, that is very reflective of the people of India too. Of having to thrive in adversity, of having to thrive and make good under very difficult circumstances and minimal resources. I think it's also very reflective of what Indians stand for. So I think you will read the book and you will realize that being an Oleander Girl means also to have to thrive under very hardy and difficult circumstances. So I don't know where her inspirations come from, as she rightly said, but I found that this was another link that also binds India and Texas together. So I think I really enjoyed reading the book, and it's great to have Chitra ji amidst us, enriching the community, the larger Houstonian community, and also being an inspiration to many women writers and to many writers. I think she has very correctly said she gets into the mind of women of India and women of the world to project what they feel. We also have Dr. Renu Khator here, both impressive examples of being Indian women, and more power to her pen. Thank you very much.